This was one of my stories that my husband and I had encountered back in the year of 2008, where we first lived at the Valley High Apartments by Mack Road, right behind Food Source Shopping Center. It was during a time when my husband and I had our first child. About a month after I had my first child, my mother-in-law was staying with us at the time to take care and look after me. Everything was fine and living normal as usual. We lived in a 1-bedroom and 1-bathroom apartment, so there are only 2 windows, which was in the bedroom and by the sliding door which went out to the patio area. As a month passed by, my mother-in-law went back to her hometown in Minnesota, which left just us 3, my husband, our daughter, and me. First night came around and it was about close to midnight. I remembered my husband woke up, slightly lifted his head up, and looked toward the closed bedroom door, and slowly but fast enough to pull the sheet over his head. As he was doing so, I was awoken by it, and I kind of pulled the sheet off his head, asking him what was wrong. He just whispered lowly that he'd tell me tomorrow. I just left it at that. The next morning came around, and about noon, I'd finally remembered and asked him what caused him to act the way he did last night. He told me that he saw a lady in a white gown with long black hair just standing in between the corner angle where the wall and the bedroom door were connected, just watching us sleep. I got a little bit of a chill running down my spine just hearing him tell me, so I said that he'd better stop joking around and for him to tell me if it was not real. He said he was not lying. It really was what he saw. But we just left it at that and went on about our days, just pretending to act like it was just a bad nightmare. The second night came along. We were already asleep, so maybe around 2 or 3 a.m. into the middle of the night, my husband woke up to use the restroom. After he was done, he came back and as he closed the door, he heard some noises coming from the kitchen that sounded like somebody was digging through dishes or searching for something. My husband totally got freaked out and hurried himself into bed and never mentioned anything of what has happened, not even to me because he knew I would be scared. Going on a few nights that had passed by with nothing, until one night, I was taking a shower while my husband was watching our daughter. As I was taking a shower, I hadn't even started with shampoo just yet. I heard someone humming right from inside the bathroom. But of course, I left the bathroom door open. I peeked my head out and looked around, but then it went dead silent. Nothing. Not a single noise. So I went on with my showering and got out. After I got out, my husband said that he was going to jump into the shower as well, and did just that. It was about 9 p.m., and I was getting my daughter's bottle ready for bed. As I was doing so, my husband called out from the bathroom and said, "Babe, why are you humming that stupid song?" I didn't really catch what he was saying, so I asked, "Huh? What did you say?" As he got out, he got dressed and came into the living room where I was at and repeated, "I said, why were you humming that stupid song?" I was stunned, shocked, scared, and had goosebumps all over my arms. There were chills running down my back, and I replied back, "So I wasn't the only one hearing that? You heard it as well?" The two of us just stared at each other and said nothing more and headed to bed. The next day came. We went to my parents' place and mentioned all that was happening and the events of the things that had been happening. We told my parents that we were probably going to move in with them for the time being until we could find another place because we no longer had the intention of living there any longer. My parents didn't say much but agreed, and so we didn't say anything to the landlord besides just letting the landlord and manager know that we'll be moving out by the end of the week. My parents came and helped us pack our things, which surprisingly, we didn't have much stuff except for the necessary things, so it didn't take too long. We were finished with packing in about 3 days. As the years passed by, I started my first job and worked for a few months. I told one of my coworkers about it, and he mentioned that those apartments were haunted because a lot of people had died there or were murdered. That was when I knew something probably happened in the unit we lived in, which we will never be going back to. Before anyone lives at a place, just remember to ask around. I'm sure people know or hear the history about the haunted areas. Interested in sharing your stories? Submit them to HmongChronicles@gmail.com or in the description below. Here is the next story. Thank you. Just a little background. I've been able to communicate with spirits since I was 14. I am now 26. Through the years, I've been able to see, hear, and talk to them. I know things that I shouldn't know, and sometimes am able to know things before it happens. I am Christian, and I feel like this is a gift from God. There are at least 3 people in my immediate family that has different abilities. I work as a CNA/med tech in an Alzheimer's unit in nursing homes. I have many stories under my belt that I usually use for campfire talks. This is just one. Well, there was a certain room at the back of the unit that was demonically possessed. Most of the caregivers there could feel an evil presence in the room as soon as we'd go in there. One day, we all decided to be ghost hunters and used the negative shots on our cameras to record the room. We all stood behind and watched the camera. While recording, we could see a dark shadow creep across to the left of the screen, attempting to duck down under the camera, but we were still able to record the thing. Whenever there would be a resident that would sleep in the room, when we would go in and check up on them, they'd have their sheets pulled up over their heads. You know, like how little kids do when they get scared. Even residents that lived in a different room prior to moving into the demonic room did the same behavior. They didn't have a habit of pulling the sheets over their heads until they moved right into that room. My residents would hold their heads, telling me, "There's a young guy in there that keeps hitting my head with a pan." So I'd pray for angels to come and protect them. One night, as soon as I was in REM sleep, I had a vision that I was standing inside the room, looking up at the ceiling. Instead of the ceiling, it was a sheet of glass with gray water running all across it. Through the water, I could see a young white guy trying to swim through it towards me, but being under the glass protected me. He looked really nice, but looked like he was from the early 1900s with hair combed to the side, a white button-up shirt tucked in, brown suspenders, and brown pants. Since there was a barrier between us, I took it as a sign that it was something negative. I told it to leave me alone, and the vision stopped. As soon as I closed my eyes, I was back in the room again, with the same sheet of glass with gray water and the same man. Water usually means turmoil when you see it. The following day, I refused to go back into the room and explained my vision to my girls. I could feel that whatever was in there wanted something from me. I went to help a resident that had just moved out of the demonic room to get ready for bed and put her into her PJs. I took her into her room and shut the main door to the hallway, but left the bathroom door open since she had a private room. As I'm on my knees, the resident and I heard a loud bang, and the door started to close in on us. The two of us screamed, and she asked me, "Oh my, what was that?" I opened the door slowly until it was opened so wide. It hit the far wall, but no one was in the room. The hall door was shut just as I had left it. I checked everywhere, and all the other CNAs had been busy helping other residents to get ready for bed. When we got back out into the hallway, my girl and I asked the resident, "Honey, how does the young man that hits you on the head look like?" She turned to me and said, "Oh, he looks very nice, but he's just so mean. He has dark hair combed to the side and is wearing a white shirt, suspenders, and brown pants." My girl and I just looked at each other and mouthed, "OMG, that's the same guy I saw the night before." Whatever was in the demonic room was really pissed at me for not going back in there that day. I think it was trying to deceive me by looking nice so I'd go in there, but my gut instinct kept telling me to not go in there. The day after, I had to go back into the room to help my girl with the resident that lived in the room at the time. As I reached up into the closet to grab her nightgown, I heard a woman singing. No one was in the room but the three of us, so me and the other CNA took the resident to the bathroom to help her get dressed. This patient rarely ever talked or said anything besides the usual hello and goodbye. When we were helping her, I had shut the bathroom door but continued to hear a woman on the other side of the door still singing. So I asked the resident, "Honey, does anything ever bother you in this room?" She turned to me with a real strange look and said, "Like what?" And I replied, like a ghost?" The resident looked serious as ever and stated, "Yeah, he wants human beings." Needless to say, we got her up in her wheelchair and ran out of that room with her. I used to live in a small town called Atwater in California. My family of 10 siblings staying, along with my parents, moved into a small 3-bedroom and 1.5 bathroom house. For the first several years, my family life went well. Not too much drama and etc., but eventually, after all of the elder siblings moved out, the house started to change. Extensive and upheated arguments went on with my parents and between siblings. I started to witness paranormal activities. The girls' room became the coldest spot of the house. Every night as you step outside at the front door, a black cat with glowing eyes would sit on the lawn and stare at the front door, not moving. I started to have nightmares of a girl dressed in white with long black hair, always wanting to kidnap me or take me away to play with her. At the time, I was about 9 to 10 years old. I am now 20. I remember waking up around 2:30 a.m. My 2 brothers and I shared the same room at the time. I slept in my twin bed, and my 2 brothers slept in their queen-sized bed. My brothers were deep asleep when I woke up to Native American noises and chanting. I thought to myself that it was just me going crazy or hearing the wind, so I decided to close my eyes and turn over to my side to sleep. I then started to hear a tapping noise come from under my mattress. My bed rail was made of metal, so you can tap on it. I woke up and thought that maybe my ears were just messing with me, so I decided to turn to my other side. As I closed my eyes, the tapping under my bed got louder. I thought to myself that this couldn't be happening. My heart started beating super fast. I felt cold sweat. I turned over facing up. I opened my eyes and saw a big black figure about 6 feet tall that was standing next to my bedside. I immediately took off, threw my blankets down the floor, and ran to my parents' room. I woke up my dad and told him about what happened, but he thought that I was just having a nightmare, so he let me sleep between him and my mom for the night. Other incidents had occurred as well, but every time something ghostly or paranormal happens, I seem to be the only one ever witnessing such things. Now, my family and I are not shamans. We're Catholics and go to church, but how can you explain such occurrences? You gotta get Pastor Salamain to come and help cleanse your house. Either that or you gotta do one, that works too. I'm not sure if this was a story I heard when I was younger that manifested into a nightmare or a repressed memory from when my family used to live in the refugee camps in Thailand. This story/memory has always been in the back of my head since childhood. When I was young, around 3 years old, my dad and I left the refugee camp to go somewhere. No recollection of where we were going, but we were on a long dirt road. Alongside the roads were shallow ditches filled with dried leaves from the trees lining the road. At a certain point of our journey, my dad suddenly grabbed me and jumped into the ditches. He hurriedly covered us both with the leaves and quietly told me to be silent, to not breathe loudly, and to close my eyes until he said something. Thankfully, I obeyed him and did as he said even though I was only 3. Time slowly went by without anything happening. Being a kid, I got anxious and nosy, so I peeked open my eyes a little. Luckily or unluckily, my head was set in the direction that we had just walked from. Within seconds of me opening my eyes, I saw people walking down the road towards us. From little specks in the far distance to more recognizable shapes, it was 3 little girls. They were dressed in black and had long hair. They talked amongst themselves as they kept on coming closer. The closer and closer they came, the more I could see that they weren't normal. They were shorter than teenage girls, but with the wrinkled faces of grandmas. They had arms that reached their knees with long nails at the end of their fingertips. They had peppered and frazzled, unkempt hair. Now I understood why my dad said to keep my eyes closed. These weren't human beings. They were banzong. Once the realization of what I was seeing hit me, I closed my eyes and tried my best to stay still. Time crept by as I could hear them walking closer and closer to us, speaking a language that was foreign yet familiar. Eventually, they passed our spot and the sounds they made faded away into the distance. Unsure of what to do, I continued to stay still like my dad had told me to do initially. For what seemed to be hours, I sat there, eyes closed, slowly inhaling and exhaling, trying my best to not make a noise. Then I heard my father's voice, ever so quietly. "Don't move, son. Let me check to see first if there's anything around us." The rustling of leaves next to me signaled to me that my father had already gotten up and was scanning our surroundings. "Don't shout or cry out, okay?" My father gently said as I suddenly felt him grab me. The next thing I knew was my face being pressed into my father's chest and his hand holding me tightly. Then came the feeling of wind against my legs and the sound of heavy breathing. I'm unsure of whether we were being chased or not, but he was running. The next thing I saw once my father finally stopped running was the refugee camp. My father finally put me down and caught his breath. The other refugees came up to us and asked my father if everything was all right. I don't remember what he told them, but I remember the looks on their faces. They were frightened. I remembered it was a couple of years ago when I heard of a story told by my close cousin Crystal's mom. We were all at a jingle bell sitting outside since there was nothing else to do. In our group, there was Crystal's mom, my mom, and 2 of my other cousins and I. She was telling us a scary story. It was one windy morning as her husband and her set off to a cemetery. They were to join the burial of a grandma who had passed away from her husband's far side of the family. When they got there, they parked away from the burial site, but it wasn't that far to walk. There was a lot of people there. Mourning families brought an abundance of flowers and balloons. Crystal's mom didn't want to go with her husband to the burial site because she didn't know anyone there. Not a single face. She suggested that she drop him off and will come back later to pick him up. However, he demanded her to go with him. After giving it a thought, she decided that she would go with him, still hesitating though. Her husband left first and she was still in the car. As she watched her husband walk towards the group of people with a lot of balloons, she swore she saw an old lady wearing Hmong clothes laying flat on her back with her hands straight out across from her. The old lady suddenly jumped up and then laid back down. Crystal's mom was freaking out and told herself that her eyes were just playing tricks on her. She quickly looked down, but, just to make sure it was just the balloons, she took a peek at it again. And there it was, an old lady jumping up and then back down, up and then back down. This time, she took off home and refused to come inside to pick her husband up. Instead, she made him walk all the way to the entrance. When he got inside the car, he asked her angrily, "Why did you leave so suddenly? I thought you were going to come too." She didn't answer him but stepped on the gas straight home. Later, she managed to gather enough guts and asked him, "Did you see that old lady jumping up and down?" He gave a look of disbelief and shook his head no, accusing her for making up excuses because she didn't want to go. He never believed her as much as she tried to not believe in what she saw that morning. Đa luôn, có chỉ sao mua cái là đa tiệt có bỏ đáng, đa chấp lần.